March 24, 1943. The skies over Sicily, Italy. Dawn broke pale and cold, casting long shadows over olive groves and jagged cliffs. The hum of engines grew louder, echoing across the valleys as a formation of P-40 Warhawks cut through the morning mist. German Luftwaffe pilots, confident and seasoned, spotted the newcomers on the radar. High above, they laughed, dismissing the young, all-black pilots of the 99th Fighter Squadron. "The Tuskegee Airmen, they won't last an hour," one joked, his words carried across the cockpit by the wind below. The Red Tail's bright scarlet-painted tails gleamed like a challenge against the gray Mediterranean sky. For these men, it wasn't just another mission. Every takeoff was a defiance against prejudice, every maneuver a statement of skill and courage. The tension was palpable. The air smelled of fuel, gun oil, and the faint tang of fear. In minutes, this mockery would turn into astonishment. The pilots who had laughed now faced an enemy unlike any they had anticipated. The first shots were fired, and history began to shift in the skies above Europe. By early 1942, the world had been engulfed in war for nearly 3 years. Europe lay fractured under Axis control. Nazi Germany's blitzkrieg had overrun Poland, France, and much of Western Europe, leaving the continent under a shadow of fear and military dominance. In the East, the Soviet Union battled relentlessly against the German onslaught, while across the Atlantic, the United States prepared to commit fully to the conflict after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Every front demanded manpower, equipment, and innovation, but within the U.S. A less visible battle was taking shape, one against systemic prejudice and entrenched racial barriers. African Americans had long been excluded from high-profile military roles, especially combat aviation. The U.S. Army Air Corps', successor to the Army Air Forces, initially resisted integrating black pilots into operational units. The prevailing belief was that African Americans lacked the aptitude and discipline for complex aerial combat. Yet, under pressure from civil rights organizations, the War Department established a program at Tuskegee, Alabama, aiming to train a segregated cadre of black pilots. The mission was audacious: prove that these men could fight, survive, and excel against one of the world's most formidable air forces. The training program at Moton Field and later at the Tuskegee Army Airfield was grueling. Trainees endured long hours of classroom instruction on aerodynamics, navigation, and gunnery, followed by relentless flight practice. From pre-flight checks to mastering the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, the pilots learned the precision and instinct required for survival in the air. Each takeoff carried weight beyond personal ambition, a test against skepticism, prejudice, and doubt. Meanwhile, the war itself was intensifying. The North African campaign had begun in 1942, with American forces landing in Morocco and Algeria during Operation Torch. These missions aimed to dislodge Axis powers and secure strategic positions along the Mediterranean. Air support was crucial, and escort missions became central to protecting bombers from Luftwaffe attacks. The challenge was immense. Inexperienced pilots faced seasoned German aces flying superior aircraft, often in coordinated formations designed to overwhelm. Every sortie required not just skill, but nerves of steel. Within this environment, the Tuskegee Airmen prepared for combat. The 99th Fighter Squadron, the first operational unit, was deployed to North Africa in 1943. Their arrival was met with skepticism from both allies and adversaries. White American units doubted their effectiveness. German intelligence scarcely noticed at first, underestimating them entirely. Yet, the pilots' rigorous training had instilled a discipline and cohesion that would prove decisive. Every mission became a proving ground, not only against enemy fire, but against the social constraints imposed by a segregated military. Leadership played a pivotal role in shaping the Red Tails. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a graduate of West Point, oversaw training and early deployments. His approach combined strict military discipline with encouragement of personal initiative. Davis understood that success in combat would require both technical excellence and unshakable confidence. He drilled his men in formation flying, gunnery precision, and rapid tactical decision-making, emphasizing that their performance in the skies would challenge not only the enemy, but entrenched prejudice back home. By spring 1943, the stage was set. The Mediterranean skies were crowded with bombers and fighters from multiple nations. German pilots, experienced from years of combat over Europe, expected easy victories against what they assumed were inexperienced, underprepared adversaries. Yet, the Red Tails deployment represented more than a tactical addition to the Allied air forces. It symbolized a test of equality, courage, and perseverance under fire. The men who had trained at Tuskegee were about to confront the harshest realities of aerial warfare, where every decision could mean life or death, and where proving their skill would resonate far beyond the battlefield. The irony was palpable. German aces, poised to dominate the skies as they had for years, would soon encounter a squadron they had dismissed as inconsequential. The Red Tails, disciplined, precise, and fearless, were about to challenge assumptions and rewrite expectations. But before the first encounter, these pilots had to survive their baptism by fire, missions that would test both their technical abilities and their resolve under pressure. Each sortie brought them closer to proving that courage, skill, and determination were not defined by skin color, but by dedication and discipline in the face of danger. As the Red Tails readied their aircraft for deployment over North Africa, the world beyond Tuskegee continued its tumultuous churn. Battles raged across deserts and mountains, in cities and skies alike. For the pilots, every engine start echoed the stakes. Failure could mean death or the reinforcement of prejudice. Success would signal a turning point, both in the war and in history. The first missions loomed, fraught with uncertainty, yet filled with the promise of redemption and vindication. By mid-1943, the Tuskegee program had evolved from an experiment into a crucible. The men who once faced mockery in their own country now prepared to meet the Luftwaffe in direct combat. Their airfield in North Africa was dusty and harsh, tents flapping in the desert wind, the air thick people with engine fumes and sand. The war felt close enough to taste. Each day brought new missions, new challenges, and whispers of skepticism from Allied units stationed nearby. To most white officers, the 99th Fighter Squadron was a curiosity, a social project born from political pressure rather than military necessity. Few believed it would last long under combat conditions. But Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. knew differently. He had lived through years of isolation at West Point, never spoken to by classmates for 4 years, and had emerged hardened by discipline and quiet pride. His leadership reflected the same endurance he demanded from his pilots. The only way to prove them wrong, he often reminded them, is by flying and winning. The early missions were escort assignments for bombers and strafing runs over enemy convoys in Tunisia and Sicily. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies. Led by veterans who had fought in the Battle of Britain and over the Eastern Front, German aircraft like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 were agile and deadly. The Tuskegee pilots flew P-40 Warhawks, rugged but outdated compared to the sleek German fighters. Yet, their discipline in formation flying and tight coordination began to earn attention. The results spoke quietly at first. On June 2, 1943, Captain Charles Hull achieved the squadron's first confirmed kill, shooting down a German FW-190 over Pantelleria. The news traveled fast, not only through the U.S. command but among Allied aircrews who had doubted their worth. "Those boys can fight," one pilot admitted afterward. For the Red Tails, it was more than a victory. It was validation. Still, prejudice lingered. Reports from certain commanders criticized the 99th for being too cautious, for lacking aggression, even when their mission orders had explicitly emphasized bomber protection over enemy pursuit. The claims were often rooted less in tactics and more in bias. It wasn't until mid-1944, after careful review by higher command, that these accusations were disproved. The 99th had not only performed within expectations, in many cases they had exceeded them. Back at Tuskegee, training intensified for new pilots preparing to join the front. The curriculum had expanded beyond basic flight, now including high-altitude escort techniques, emergency landing drills, and combat coordination with bomber formations. The U.S. Army Air Forces, impressed by growing results, authorized the formation of the 332nd Fighter Group, combining the 100th, 301st, and 302nd Squadrons with the original 99th together. They would soon fly under one symbol, a crimson tail, when the 332nd transitioned to the North American P-51 Mustang. Everything changed. The aircraft was fast, reliable, and capable of long-range escort, finally giving the Red Tails the technological edge they needed. Its sleek silver body and powerful Merlin engine allowed them to match and often surpass German fighters. The addition of the bright red paint on their tails was both practical and symbolic. It helped bomber crews identify them easily, but it also became a statement of pride. Wherever the Red Tails flew, they were unmistakable. In Italy, their reputation grew. Bomber crews began requesting the Red Tails as escorts, spreading stories that no bomber was lost under their watch. Though not literally true, a handful were. Their record remained among the best in the U.S. Army Air Forces. Word of their precision, discipline, and courage reached all the way to Washington. The experiment was no longer a question of feasibility. It had become an example of excellence. Meanwhile, within Germany, intelligence officers took notice. Reports described Negerpolitan, black pilots who fought with unusual precision and discipline. For the Luftwaffe, this was both unexpected and unsettling. The racial ideologies that underpinned Nazi doctrine viewed African Americans as inferior, yet here they were, skilled, coordinated, and fearless in the sky. Every downed German aircraft eroded not just their tactical advantage, but their propaganda. By late 1944, the Red Tails had evolved from an underestimated squadron into a strategic asset. They escorted bombers deep into German territory, Regensburg, Munich, Berlin, confronting elite Luftwaffe units head-on. Their success defied every assumption once made about them. Within the cockpits, the pilots carried both the weight of history and the steady calm of professionals who had nothing left to prove, only missions left to fly. But before the acclaim and statistics, before the medals and the headlines, there was struggle, long hours of flight under fire, fatigue, loss, and resolve. The Red Tails story was never just about victory. It was about persistence. Each mission carried a quiet defiance, each kill a statement. They weren't only protecting bombers, they were dismantling centuries of prejudice, one sortie at a time. The wines over Italy grew colder as winter approached. The Red Tails had survived their early trials and were now entering the most intense phase of their combat journey. Their opponents, once laughing, had begun to take them seriously. The stage was set for confrontation in the open skies of Europe, where courage and precision would decide who ruled the air. War, at its core, is fought by individuals, men who breathe, sweat, and fear beneath the cold steel of their machines. For the Tuskegee Airmen, every flight was more than a mission. It was a statement of existence in a system that doubted them from the start. At their bases in Italy, life was harsh but disciplined. The roar of engines and the scent of burning fuel filled the air daily. Before dawn, pilots ran final checks on their P-51 Mustangs, tightening straps, checking oxygen lines, and whispering silent prayers. Letters from home, often from mothers who had sent their sons into a segregated army, were tucked inside flight jackets like talismans. Many of these men came from ordinary American towns, Chicago, Detroit, Birmingham, and small rural communities across the South. Most had grown up watching planes from afar, never believing they'd fly one. Yet, they were now entrusted with guarding B-17 flying fortresses, massive bombers that carried hundreds of lives and the weight of Allied strategy. In the air, camaraderie was everything. Pilots watched each other 6 o'clock constantly, their eyes scanning the horizon for enemy silhouettes. They learned to read each other's movements like language. A quick roll, a tilt of the wing, a flash of red tail in the sunlight. Communication was instinctual, built on hours of formation drills and combat discipline, but fear was constant. When tracer rounds flashed past the cockpit, when fuel tanks were punctured, or when a comrade's plane spiraled toward the ground, each man understood how fragile survival was. The pilots rarely spoke of fear aloud. They buried it under professionalism and pride. They knew that one mistake, one emotional lapse, could confirm every racist doubt that surrounded their service. After missions, they gathered in the mess tent. Some joked quietly, others sat in silence, eyes still reflecting the clouds and smoke of battle. They were young, many in their early 20s, yet carried themselves like veterans. To the world, they were symbols. To one another, they were brothers who had seen death and refused to yield to it. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. was more than a commanding officer. He was the axis on which the Red Tail's entire story turned. Tall, precise, and unflinching, Davis carried the weight of both responsibility and expectation. His demeanor was calm, almost cold, but his men knew it hid a fire of determination. Davis had been isolated at West Point, ostracized by his peers because of his race. That silent endurance became his trademark. When he took command of the 332nd Fighter Group, he knew that their mission was about more than victory. It was about legitimacy. Failure would reinforce the military's belief that integration was impossible. Success could alter history. His leadership philosophy was simple: discipline, precision, and integrity. The measure of a man, he once said, is not in his words, but in what he does under pressure. Davis demanded flawless flying, tight formations, strict adherence to orders, and an unwavering focus on the mission objective. If his men were to be remembered, it would be for professionalism, not recklessness. He made one controversial decision that would define the Red Tail's legacy: strict adherence to bomber escort duty. While other fighter groups often chased enemy aircraft for glory, Davis ordered his pilots never to abandon their bombers. To him, protecting the bombers meant saving lives and proving discipline superior to ego. The strategy worked. Bomber crews soon learned that when the Red Tails appeared, their odds of survival rose sharply. Behind closed doors, Davis fought other battles, bureaucratic and political ones. Reports questioning the squadron's capability circulated among higher ranks, threatening to have the unit disbanded. Davis flew to Washington, testified before the War Department, and defended his men with evidence, not emotion. His poise under scrutiny impressed even skeptical officers. The 332nd remained active and went on to make history. To his pilots, Davis represented unyielding strength. He rarely raised his voice, yet his authority was absolute. His presence alone reminded them of the stakes. When Davis walked the flight line before dawn, inspecting aircraft with methodical precision, even the hum of engines seemed to quiet. His leadership transformed the Red Tails from a social experiment into one of the most respected units in the U.S. Army Air Forces. Across the skies of Italy and Central Europe, the Luftwaffe still held a fearsome reputation. German fighter groups, composed of veterans from the Battle of Britain and the Eastern Front, viewed the air war as their domain. To them, dominance in the air was a matter of national pride and ideology. When intelligence reports first mentioned colored American pilots, German officers dismissed them outright. Nazi racial ideology deemed such an idea absurd, a propaganda trick at best. But those assumptions began to crumble during engagements in mid-1944. The Red Tails flew differently. Their formations were disciplined, their attack patterns efficient, and their coordination unusually tight. German pilots soon noticed that these were not inexperienced recruits. They were deliberate, patient, and precise, difficult to lure into reckless dogfights. Luftwaffe radio transmissions captured frustration from squadron leaders. The red-tailed ones, they don't break. As the war dragged on, Germany's once elite air corps began to suffer. Fuel shortages, inexperienced replacements, and Allied bombing raids had thinned their ranks. Yet, encountering the Red Tails added insult to injury. Here were the very men their ideology claimed inferior, now matching, even surpassing them in skill and tenacity. Some Luftwaffe aces respected them privately, though it would never appear in official reports. Others grew furious at the idea of losing to Metropolitan. Propaganda officers avoided mentioning these encounters altogether. But among pilots, the stories spread quickly. The red-tailed fighters were efficient, fearless, and relentless. They defended their bombers to the end, even when outnumbered. To the German veterans, that discipline, the refusal to scatter or abandon formation, was the mark of professionalism. It unnerved them. In time, the same laughter that once filled radio chatter before combat turned into silence. The Red Tails had earned their respect not through ideology, but through performance. By late 1944, these three perspectives, the human, the leadership, and the enemy, converged in the same skies over Europe. Each mission carried not only military weight but moral gravity. Every victory chipped away at prejudice, every loss a reminder of the cost of proving equality through war, but the full reckoning of skill and destiny was yet to come. Ahead lay the decisive encounters that would turn the Red Tails from a symbol into a legend, when the laughter of German pilots would finally fade under the roar of Mustang engines. By late 1944, the skies over Europe had become the most dangerous battlefield in the world. Thousands of bombers filled the upper air, their formations stretching for miles, slow, heavy, and vulnerable. Below and above them, the Luftwaffe waited. Escort duty was among the most demanding and thankless missions in the war. While other fighter groups often broke formation to chase kills, the Red Tails followed a different code. Their task was to protect. Each sortie began in tense silence. As the bombers climbed, the Red Tails formed up in tight patterns, wings gleaming in sunlight. Communication was minimal. Every pilot knew his role. They stayed close, weaving protective screens over the bomber columns, intercepting any incoming threat before it reached the formation. The Tuskegee Airmen's precision became legendary. They developed new escort tactics emphasizing group cohesion rather than pursuit. Colonel Davis enforced it relentlessly. No unnecessary dogfights, no chasing fleeing enemies. The result was a remarkable reduction in bomber losses. Bomber crews began to request the Red Tails by name, a mark of absolute trust in a theater where trust could mean survival. Even when outnumbered, the Red Tails' discipline held. They learned to turn their supposed disadvantage, flying in predictable escort patterns, into strength. German pilots, expecting chaos, found themselves facing calm, organized resistance. The Red Tails would draw them in, force them into unfavorable positions, and counterattack with deadly precision. Their tactical excellence was not built on instinct alone, but on rigorous preparation. Simulated engagements, altitude drills, and hours of studying enemy tactics gave them an edge. While other groups focused on speed and aggression, the 332nd's strength was control of formation, of fear, of space. That control became their weapon. The results were unmistakable. In early 1945, their record of bomber protection, less than 5 losses per 1,000 sorties, became one of the best in the U.S. Army Air Forces. What began as a segregated experiment had evolved into a model of aerial discipline and efficiency. The P-51 Mustang was not just another aircraft. It was the machine that changed the war in the air. Sleek, powerful, and capable of long-range escort, it gave the Red Tails the platform to prove their full potential earlier in the war. The Tuskegee Airmen had flown the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk and later the Bell P-39. Airacobra, rugged but underpowered compared to the German Bf-109 and FW-190, the Warhawk's performance at high altitude was limited, often leaving escort pilots struggling to keep pace with bombers. But when the 332nd Fighter Group transitioned to the P-51 Mustang in 1944, everything changed. The Mustang's Rolls-Royce Merlin engine allowed it to fly higher, faster, and farther than anything the Luftwaffe could easily counter. With a top speed exceeding 430 miles per hour and a range of over 1,500 miles, it became the perfect escort aircraft for deep penetration bombing raids into Germany. Its 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns provided devastating firepower, capable of shredding enemy fighters or strafing ground targets with equal efficiency. But it wasn't just technology, it was what the pilots did with it. The Red Tails customized their flying style to the Mustang's capabilities. They used its speed not to chase glory, but to anticipate enemy attacks, cut off diving fighters, and reposition rapidly around the bomber formations. The bright red tails, originally a unit identifier, became a psychological signal to both friend and foe. Bomber crews saw them and felt relief. German pilots saw them and felt unease. In combat reports, Luftwaffe units began noting rote Schwanz, red tails, as a specific and formidable threat. The P-51's endurance allowed the red tails to accompany bombers deep into enemy territory and back, something no other Allied fighter group could claim consistently before. 1944, the Mustang gave the red tails the wings they deserved. It allowed their discipline, training, and tactical acumen to fully unfold in the theater of war. For the first time, their skill met its ideal machine, and together, man and machine reshaped the air war over Europe. While the Red Tails battled German fighters in the skies above Europe, they were fighting another war, quieter but just as relentless, against prejudice at home. Segregation permeated every aspect of military life. Black soldiers were often confined to menial labor or logistics roles, denied the opportunity to fight. Even within the Tuskegee program, the men faced constant scrutiny and the burden of proving their worth under a magnifying glass. A single mistake could be used to justify the failure of an entire experiment. In letters home, pilots wrote about the irony of their service, risking their lives for a country that still denied them equality. Yet, many refused to be defined by bitterness. "We fight because we are Americans," one pilot wrote, "and someday America will remember that." Their courage resonated far beyond the war. Each mission became a silent protest, each victory a rebuttal to prejudice. They fought for survival, but also for recognition, for the right to be judged by ability, not color. The Red Tails' achievements slowly began to shift perceptions. White bomber crews, once skeptical, grew fiercely protective of their escorts. "Those boys saved us," many said after missions. Respect born of necessity became respect born of admiration, but systemic change came slowly. Even after the war, the U.S. military remained segregated until 1948, when President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, mandating full integration of the armed forces. That policy change was not born in conference rooms alone. It was earned in blood and courage by men who refused to give up. The Red Tails' fight symbolized something larger than themselves. They were the embodiment of an idea that courage knows no color and excellence can emerge from oppression. In the crucible of war, they proved not only their skill but their humanity, breaking through the barriers that had once grounded them. By 1944 and 1945, all these angles, tactical mastery, technological advantage, and moral conviction fused into a single narrative of transformation. The Red Tails had become a symbol not just of victory in battle, but of defiance in spirit. And soon, that spirit would be tested to its limit in the skies over Germany, where the Luftwaffe prepared one final stand, and the Red Tails would turn mockery into legend. The order came through before dawn. The 332nd Fighter Group would escort the 15th Air Force's massive bombing raid, more than 1,500 bombers striking targets in and around the German capital. It was the deepest penetration mission yet, cutting through the heart of the Reich's defenses. For the Red Tails, it was more than another assignment. It was the ultimate trial, the moment they would stand in the skies above Berlin itself. The mission briefing was short, clinical, and tense. Everyone knew the risk. The Luftwaffe had concentrated its remaining fighter strength around Berlin, Focke-Wulfs, Messerschmitts, even the new and deadly Me-160 jet fighters, the fastest aircraft in the world. As the first rays of dawn touched the runways in Ramitelli, Italy, the Red Tails' Mustangs began to roll. Engines roared like thunder across the Adriatic, their red tails glowing faintly under the morning light. Lieutenant Colonel Lee Archer checked his instruments, feeling the vibration of the Merlin engine through his gloves. In that instant, history and destiny felt the same. They climbed into formation, 43 Mustangs rising into the upper atmosphere. The air thinned, the world below turned to cloud and haze, and the contrails of the bomber streams came into view like rivers of silver stretching toward the north. For hours, silence ruled the sky. Then, over central Germany, the warnings crackled through the radio. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. They came in waves. Dozens of German fighters, Bf-109s and Fw-190s, diving from the sun, guns blazing, tracers cutting through the thin air. The Red Tails broke formation instantly, not in panic but with practiced precision. The sky became chaos, twisting contrails, sudden bursts of fire, black smoke spiraling toward the earth, one Mustang after another engaged, maneuvering with lethal calm. Lee Archer dove beneath a bomber formation, then pulled up hard, catching a German fighter broadside. He fired a 1-second burst, the Messerschmitt disintegrated midair, flames trailing in slow motion against the endless blue. Above them, Captain Roscoe Brown led his flight against an even greater threat, 3 Me-160 jet fighters, streaking through the sky faster than anything the Americans had ever seen. The jets slashed through the formation, their 30mm cannons tearing holes in the bomber ranks. To be 17s exploded in fireballs. Parachutes dotted the sky. Brown made the split-second decision, I'm going after the jets. It was madness. The Mustangs were slower by more than 100 miles per hour. But Brown knew the jets' weakness. They lost energy in turns and were vulnerable during takeoff or landing. He climbed high, then dived in from the side, cutting across the Me-62's path. His burst of machine gun fire hit dead center. The German jet shuddered, smoke pouring from its engines, and then it vanished into the clouds below. That day, the Red Tails became one of the few allied units to successfully shoot down enemy jets in air combat, but victory came at a price. One by one, Mustangs disappeared, some spiraling downward, others gliding crippled toward Allied lines. The sky was filled with fire and debris, the thunder of engines, the rattle of machine guns. For hours, the Red Tails fought not for glory, but for endurance. By the time the bombers reached Berlin's outskirts, the Luftwaffe had thrown everything it had left into the fight. The Germans were desperate. The Red Tails were relentless. As the bombers released their payloads over the industrial zones and rail yards of the city, the escorts continued to hold their line. Every turn, every dive, every maneuver a defense of the mission and of the men they guarded. When the last bomb bay doors closed and the formation turned for home, the Red Tails still circled above, scanning for stragglers, making sure no bomber was left behind. Their ammunition was nearly gone. Fuel gauges hovered on empty. Yet they refused to leave until the last bomber was safe. Hours later, they landed back at Ramitelli. The ground crews counted bullet holes, patched torn wings, refueled engines. The radio reports came in slowly, one after another. The bombers had reached Berlin. The mission had succeeded. The final tally, 3 Me-260 jets destroyed, an unprecedented feat. No bombers lost to enemy fighters while under their escort. Dozens of enemy aircraft shot down. For the men of the 332nd, it was more than numbers. It was vindication. The laughter that had once greeted their presence in European skies had vanished. Even the most skeptical bomber crews sent back messages of gratitude and awe. Those Red Tails don't leave us, one pilot radioed after landing. Not ever. As the sun set over Italy that evening, the airfield at Ramitelli glowed red in the light, the same color as the tails that had flown over Berlin. The men were exhausted, but they understood what had happened. They had faced the best the Luftwaffe had left, jets, veterans, chaos, and emerged as legends, but the story was not over. The war was nearing its end, and with it would come the reckoning, the question of what their victories truly meant, both in Europe and back home. By spring of 1945, the Red Tails had become a phenomenon whispered across air bases from Italy to England. Crews who once rolled their eyes at the mention of colored pilots now asked, almost reverently, are the Red Tails flying escort today? In the air, their crimson markings were no longer a curiosity. They were a symbol of safety. Bomber crews had seen too many squadrons peel off under pressure, leaving formations exposed. But the 332nd stayed, always, through flak, through fighters, through fuel shortages and chaos. They never abandoned the bombers they were ordered to protect, and the numbers proved it. Over 15,000 escort sorties, the Red Tails lost only 27 bombers to enemy aircraft, one of the lowest loss rates of any escort group in the entire U.S. Army Air Forces. Their kill count, on the other hand, climbed steadily past 112 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed, including 3 of Germany's new jet fighters, each mission built upon the last, forging a reputation so strong it reached even the desks of generals who had once questioned their existence. At the center of it all were men like Captain Lee Archer, who became the only confirmed black ace of the war with 5 aerial victories. Roscoe Brown, who would go on to shoot down a Me-162, and Lt. Charles McGee, whose career would span 3 wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, amassing over 400 combat missions in total. Yet behind every name and statistic was an undercurrent of defiance, a quiet war against disbelief. In the officers' mess at Rami Teli, laughter often carried through the night. Not the mocking kind they'd once endured, but the laughter of relief, of men who had survived another day, who had proven something no one could take away. They said we couldn't fight, one pilot said, staring into his tin cup of coffee. Now they can't fight without us. The shift in perception was undeniable. In bomber briefings, commanders began insisting on Red Tail escort. Some even delayed missions to ensure the 332nd was available. The same high command that had once viewed the Tuskegee experiment as a political concession now treated it as a strategic asset. Still, every victory came at a human cost. The 332nd lost 66 pilots killed in action, and dozens more were wounded or captured. Every return to Rami Teli was shadowed by empty bunks and silent toasts. They mourned their fallen with dignity. A salute, a prayer, a moment of silence under the red glow of the setting sun. The war in Europe was entering its final act. The Allied advance pressed deeper into Germany. Hitler's empire was collapsing. But in the air, danger remained as fierce as ever. The Luftwaffe, though broken, still struck with desperate fury. Each mission could be the last. On April 15, 1945, the Red Tails flew one of their final major missions, escorting bombers to attack enemy positions near Munich. By then, Allied victory was certain. Yet, they approached the skies with the same focus, the same discipline, the same defiance. Archer, Brown, McGee, all veterans now, led their squadrons with steady hands. The dogfights that day were brief but intense. German resistance was fragmented, scattered, but still deadly. One last Focke-Wulf dove out of the sun, guns blazing, and was cut down by a perfectly timed burst from a red-tail Mustang. When they landed back in Italy, the airfield erupted in cheers. Not because the mission was their greatest, but because they knew it might be their last. The war was nearly over. The long struggle, not just for victory but for recognition, had reached its climax. In the weeks that followed, the confirmation reports poured in: 112 enemy kills, dozens of distinguished flying crosses, 150 air medals, and 740 for air medals with oak leaf clusters awarded to the men of the 332nd. And then, something remarkable happened. At Rami Teli, General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the calm, unflinching commander who had guided them from obscurity to glory, stood before his men. He didn't raise his voice or deliver a fiery speech. Instead, he spoke with quiet pride. You have not only fought the enemy in the skies, you have fought the enemy of doubt, and won. The Red Tails had become more than pilots. They were a symbol of what discipline, courage, and unity could achieve even in the face of institutional prejudice. Back in Germany, Luftwaffe pilots began to speak grudgingly of them. Reports intercepted by Allied intelligence described a highly skilled Negro unit whose performance equals or exceeds that of other American fighter groups, the mockery that had echoed through the Luftwaffe's ready rooms 2 years earlier was gone, replaced by respect. As April gave way to May and the war in Europe drew to its close, the skies fell silent. The last missions were flown, the hangars emptied. The Mustangs stood in rows, engines cooling, their red tails gleaming under the spring sun, as if stained with the memory of every battle they had fought and every prejudice they had overcome. In the distance, bells rang out across Europe announcing Germany's surrender. For the men of the 332nd, it was victory, but also the beginning of a new kind of fight. They had proven their worth in war. Now, they would have to prove it in peace. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. Across airfields, pilots raised their hands in exhausted salute, the engines of war finally falling silent. In Ramitelli, Italy, the red tails gathered one last time beneath the hangars where they had spent 2 relentless years. The Mediterranean wind rustled through their warm flight jackets. Their P-51 Mustangs stood in formation like veterans, battle-scarred, oil-streaked, wings patched, and proud. There was no parade, no grand speech. Just quiet smiles, weary embraces, and a deep, private sense of vindication. The records were undeniable. 15,000-plus sorties flown. Over 112 confirmed aerial victories, 66 pilots lost in action. Nearly 1,000 men trained through. Tuskegee's program had begun as an experiment, had become one of the most successful air combat units of the entire war, and yet, as the pilots packed their gear and looked toward home, a difficult truth lingered. They had conquered the enemy abroad, but not the prejudice waiting for them in America. When the Red Tails returned stateside, their heroism was met with silence in many quarters. There were no ticker tape parades in New York, no film reels celebrating their victories. In some military installations, they were still forced to enter through side gates and segregated barracks, Captain Lee Archer later recalled. You could fight Nazis all day and still not be allowed to sit next to a white officer at dinner, but cracks had begun to form in the walls of segregation, cracks made by courage, competence, and undeniable success. General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the stoic leader of the 332nd, carried a quiet determination that outlasted the war. He knew that the Tuskegee experiment's success had set in motion something much larger than a military victory. Their discipline and results had provided the irrefutable evidence that the old assumptions that race dictated skill, that prejudice equaled policy, were lies. In the months following V-Day, official reports began circulating through the Pentagon and War Department. Commanders who had once opposed the idea of black aviators now found themselves forced to acknowledge reality. The 332nd Fighter Group has demonstrated superior tactical effectiveness and outstanding discipline, one document concluded. No basis exists for racial differentiation in combat performance. That phrase, "no basis exists," would echo for years. The war had proven what generations of discrimination had denied: equality in skill, courage, and leadership. The implications rippled outward, influencing debates in Washington and shaping the future of the U.S. Armed Forces. Meanwhile, back at Tuskegee Army Airfield, the next generation of pilots trained beneath the same Alabama sun, inspired by the legends who had written history over Europe. Some of the returning veterans stayed on as instructors, their stories now part of the curriculum, not myth, but manual. Outside the base, the world was changing. Newspapers began to publish cautious features about Negro airmen who shamed the Luftwaffe. The Pittsburgh Courier and Chicago Defender ran headlines hailing them as heroes. Slowly, public opinion began to turn, but the men themselves remained humble. When reporters asked Archer or Brown what victory felt like, they never spoke of revenge or triumph. Instead, they spoke of duty, of missions completed, bombers protected, friends lost. Their pride was quiet, their satisfaction rooted in the simple truth that they had done what they set out to do. In the air, they had been equals, bound by physics, skill, and courage alone. On the ground, the fight for equality was only beginning. Back in Washington, President Harry S. Truman was taking notice. The data, the reports, the undeniable record of the Red Tails, all of it painted a single, inescapable conclusion: the armed forces could no longer justify segregation. By 1947, those reports would help fuel a decision that would reshape the U.S. military and the nation itself. But before that turning point came, the Red Tails lived through the uneasy quiet of post-war transition. Some stayed in service. Others went home to civilian life, trading their flight suits for factory overalls, college books, or family farms. Their achievements were not yet taught in schools nor recorded in history books. Still, among the men who had flown those crimson-marked Mustangs, there was no bitterness, only memory. Memory of open skies, of danger faced without hesitation, and of proving, beyond all argument, what courage truly looked like. And though the world moved on, the symbol of the red tail, bright, defiant, unforgettable, would continue to haunt the conscience of a nation still struggling to live up to its ideals. In the years immediately following the war, the world was rebuilding, cities in ruins, empires fading, and ideologies shifting. For the United States, victory brought both triumph and contradiction. It had defeated fascism abroad while maintaining segregation at home. But the record of the Tuskegee Airmen now stood as a living challenge to that contradiction. Inside the Pentagon, the official evaluations of the 332nd Fighter Group could not be ignored. Reports noted exceptional discipline, outstanding morale, and superior escort performance. Quietly, senior officers began to acknowledge what was once unthinkable, that the U.S. military's segregated system was not only unjust but inefficient. When President Harry S. Truman took office in 1945, he inherited a divided military and a divided nation. Civil rights advocates, veterans, and some senior commanders began to pressure the White House to act. Among the files on Truman's desk were documents bearing the signature of General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who argued with calm precision that segregation was a strategic liability. 3 years later, on July 26, 1948, Truman signed Executive Order 9981, declaring that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. It was a single paragraph that carried the weight of every mile flown by the Red Tails for the men of the 332nd. The order came not as surprise, but as quiet vindication. Their combat record had become one of the most compelling arguments for integration, proof that courage and competence know no color. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. rose through the ranks, eventually becoming the first African-American general in the U.S. Air Force. His calm leadership, honed in the skies over Europe, helped guide a new era of military professionalism. Many of his pilots followed similar paths. Charles McGee continued flying through Korea and Vietnam. Roscoe Brown became an educator and civic leader. Others went on to careers in business, government, and aviation. Yet, beyond medals and ranks, the Red Tails' true victory was in perception. When they first took to the air, many within the Army doubted that black pilots could handle complex machinery or make sound combat decisions. By the war's end, bomber crews prayed for their protection. The transformation was total. From skepticism to respect, from mockery to admiration, their influence extended even further. The story of the Tuskegee Airmen inspired a new generation to see the sky as a place they belonged. Engineers, astronauts, officers, and aviators who would carry that legacy into the space age. Decades later, when the Space Shuttle Endeavour lifted off, among its crew was Colonel Guion Bluford, the first African-American astronaut, a man who credited the Tuskegee Airmen for proving what was possible. But even in their old age, the veterans of the 332nd never saw themselves as symbols. "We just wanted to fly," many of them said. "We wanted to serve our country." Still, symbols they became. Their red-tailed Mustangs appeared in museum exhibits, history books, and films. Presidents and generals saluted them. In 2007, more than 60 years after their first mission, the surviving Tuskegee Airmen received the Congressional Gold Medal, one of America's highest civilian honors, standing in the Capitol Rotunda that day. Their hair white and uniforms crisp, they looked up at the flag they had defended in the skies above Europe. Reporters noted that when applause filled the hall, many of them simply nodded quietly. The recognition was long delayed, but finally complete. The laughter of German pilots over Sicily, once loud and confident, had long since faded into history. What endured instead was the echo of engines, the sound of men who had taken flight not just against the enemy, but against prejudice itself. Their journey from experiment to excellence reshaped the U.S. military and helped lay the moral groundwork for America's civil rights movement. The skies they once fought through were now peaceful, but their red tails, bright as ever, continued to remind the world of what courage, discipline, and dignity can achieve when the world doubts you most. The war ended, but the story of the red tails never truly did. It lived on in hangars turned to museums, in faded photographs, in the memories of men who once looked up and saw the sky not as a limit, but as a promise. History often remembers battles by their numbers, kills, sorties, victories. But the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen is measured in something far deeper: transformation. They changed the way a nation saw itself. They proved that courage and excellence could silence prejudice more completely than any speech or law ever could. Their triumph was not built on anger, but on mastery. Every takeoff, every escort, every disciplined formation over enemy skies said the same thing: we belong here. When they painted the tails of their Mustangs red, it wasn't for decoration. It was identity. A streak of defiance cutting through the clouds, announcing to allies and enemies alike that the men flying these machines would not yield to doubt, nor fade into anonymity. In the years that followed, their influence rippled outward into the jet age, into the civil rights movement, into every cockpit and command post that came after. The Tuskegee Airmen did not just win a war. They redefined what victory meant. Today, when a young pilot climbs into the seat of an F-22 or F-35, the lineage is unbroken. The discipline, the focus, the quiet pride, all trace back to those red-tailed Mustangs over Europe. From laughter to respect, from segregation to honor, from a dismissed experiment to a legend that outlived empires, the German pilots who once mocked them are long gone, their arrogance swallowed by time. But the echo of the red tails remains, a hum in the sky, a testament to courage under fire, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest battles are not fought for territory or triumph, but for dignity. And in that fight, the Tuskegee Airmen did more than win. They soared.